My classmate tried to burn a metal crest into my skin. I got revenge and made him beg for mercy. Months later, he pleaded with me not to mention him in my graduation speech. I was kicked out of my house the day I turned 14. Most people thought it was a tragedy, but for me, it was liberation, because that was the day I was sent to a prestigious boarding school in England. I grew up in a cold house, full of emotional abuse, so even though I suddenly found myself living among teenagers with Rolex watches and Oxford-level vocabularies, I felt relieved. I thought I was the only one who didn't belong, until I met Ethan. He showed up one rainy afternoon, with a worn-out backpack and glasses that seemed too heavy for his face. The entire dining hall went silent when Ethan walked in, moving carefully like he was afraid to break the air. I almost waved him over to my table, but a voice behind me stopped me. "Don't bother with him," Mason, my roommate, whispered. "The last scholarship kid stole a teacher's credit card." I wanted to argue, but then I remembered how I'd been completely ignored my first month too, so I stayed quiet. I told myself, if I had to suffer to survive here, maybe he did too. But what they did to Ethan in the days that followed still haunts me. It started with things that seemed harmless. One morning, the library announced a new security check system. Ethan was the only student required to pass through it every time. Rich kids started accidentally spilling water on him during meals, knowing he didn't have a second shirt. The worst part? He never fought back. He'd just force a smile, quietly cleaning up the mess. Whenever his mom sent cookies, he'd share them with everyone, even the ones who mocked him. One time, I saw him return a lost wallet to the same kid who had just called him scholarship trash. I thought if I stayed out of it, it would eventually stop. But then came Tradition Week, an event where students with alumni parents got to bring them to school. That's when things turned truly cruel. And as usual, Ethan became the target. I figured if I just avoided everything during Tradition Week, it'd be fine, so I stayed in the library until late at night. But as I headed back to the dorm, I heard footsteps behind me in the basement. 3 upperclassmen cornered me without a word. From the shadows, Preston, the debate team captain, stepped forward with a strange look on his face. In his hand was a shiny metal object, heating under a travel lighter. The other 2 grabbed my arms as Preston held the metal closer. "Everyone without blood ties here has to earn their mark," he said. I watched the edge of the badge glow bright orange. The heat made it hard to breathe. Every movement felt useless. I started screaming, but no one heard, or maybe no one wanted to. Then suddenly, the fire alarm went off. The ceiling sprinklers erupted, soaking the whole basement. The badge hit the floor with a horrifying sizzle. Preston cursed and ordered everyone to leave. I collapsed, hands still trembling in shock. The smell of burning metal clung to my nose, making me nauseous. But what I'll never forget is the person who helped me stand that night. A gentle hand reached for my wrist. It was Ethan. He didn't say a word, just handed me a tissue and picked up my backpack. He was drenched, but his eyes were strangely calm. We sat on the stairs in silence for nearly half an hour. Neither of us needed to say anything. We understood. That was the first time I felt like I wasn't alone. After that, I started paying more attention to Ethan. In class, he always knew how to blend in without drawing attention. But bullies never let go that easily. They made up a rumor that he stole test answers and spread it through the school-wide group chat. He didn't react, just quietly emailed the headmaster asking for a private meeting. But that meeting led to an outcome no one expected. The principal told him, "We can't act on rumors unless there's proof." But that sentence was exactly what pushed Ethan to act. And this time, he wasn't doing it alone. Ethan started documenting everything: who said what, who did what, where, and when. He still handed out cookies like usual, but his eyes didn't dodge anymore. For the first time, I saw a spark in his face. I helped Ethan organize the notes, putting everything into a detailed timeline. We even printed out photos from the library's security cameras. But the more we prepared, the more I realized this wasn't going to be easy. One day, I found my backpack had been rifled through. Nothing was missing, except for a note. "Knowing too much isn't good for you." I didn't tell Ethan, but from that day on, I always locked my drawer. Ethan started getting called into the office for being disrespectful to teachers. All he did was ask why his test had been graded differently. The principal didn't respond, just told him to sign a written warning. I once saw Ethan walking alone in the dorm courtyard. It was so cold the leaves were frozen. He wasn't wearing a coat, someone had slashed it up in the locker room, but he still didn't complain. I suggested we reach out to parents or report everything to the authorities, but Ethan just shook his head. No one believes us. They always side with the stronger ones. That's when I realized how close he was to giving up hope, but Ethan didn't stop. He began sending anonymous letters to the school board, each one with proof of what had been done, and this time, he signed them with red ink. We posted a flyer on the student bulletin board about a string of thefts on campus. Less than an hour later, it vanished, replaced by an invitation to a mandatory assembly. Leading it, Preston. Preston stood on stage and announced, "Someone is spreading lies and anonymous letters to divide this school." All eyes turned toward Ethan. And me? I was sitting right in the front row, heart pounding out of my chest. After the assembly, I saw Ethan get stopped by two students in the hallway. No punches, just a sweet threat. "You want to stay at this school, right?" Ethan didn't answer. He just bowed his head and kept walking. That night, he didn't respond to my messages. But just before I fell asleep, a photo arrived in my email. It was a scan of a disciplinary form, Ethan's signature at the bottom. And under it, one last sentence. I'm not wrong, they are. I printed out the image and went to find him at the library. But Ethan didn't show up to any classes that day. His dorm room door was locked from the outside. When I asked the dorm manager, all they said was, "Ethan's been temporarily suspended." No explanation. No one seemed surprised, except me, standing there, feeling like the whole school had just swallowed someone whole. At lunch, Preston laughed with his group, mocking Ethan's voice. I'm not wrong, they are. Everyone burst into laughter like it was a comedy skit. I clenched my fists so hard my nails left marks on my palms. I tried contacting Ethan's family, but there was no info in any public records. Even his homeroom teacher just told me, "You should focus on your studies." And that's when I finally understood what Ethan meant by feeling invisible. I went back to our timeline, reviewing every piece of evidence we'd gathered. I heard Ethan's voice in my head. No one believes you, unless you make them see. And I decided I would be the one to expose everything for him. I compiled all the evidence into a confidential dossier, every message, every photo, every redacted report. I made an anonymous backup copy and sent it directly to the principal's email. A week later, Ethan returned to school. But this time, he didn't walk in with his head down. He walked into class, shoulders back, and the room fell completely silent. The tension was razor sharp as Ethan placed a thick folder on the teacher's desk. This contains everything, from grade tampering, to abuse of power, to bullying. And this time, his voice was steady, clear. A few students stood up, ready to protest. But Ethan just smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry, I already sent it to the Education Inspectorate office too." The room went dead, silent, not out of fear, but shock. Preston walked forward, about to knock the folder to the ground, but the teacher grabbed his arm. No one touches the evidence. And for the first time, Preston backed off. That afternoon, an emergency meeting was held, with school board members and parent reps in attendance. Copies of the documents were handed out, evidence read aloud. Some parents walked out halfway through, faces pale as chalk. 1 week later, Preston and 2 other students were suspended indefinitely. The principal announced a full-scale internal investigation. And Ethan? He was moved to the honors program with a full scholarship for his final year. After Preston's suspension, no one spoke about it again. It was like the whole school had silently agreed to forget. But I knew that silence wasn't the end. It was the calm before something new. Ethan spoke less after that, spent more time alone in the dorm courtyard. Even though he was cleared, there was something quieter in him, like someone who walked through fire and made it out, but still carried the smoke. I invited him to join the school's documentary video group. He said no at first, but eventually showed up to our first meeting. When he picked up the camera again, I noticed his hands weren't shaking as much anymore. We worked together on a short documentary about invisible jobs on campus. Ethan said he wanted to tell the story of the school's gatekeeper, the first adult who ever believed he was innocent. I nodded. It was the perfect place to begin again. While we were editing the video, Ethan suddenly said, "I don't think everyone's bad, just scared of being left out." I understood he wasn't just talking about others. He was also forgiving himself. And I realized, forgiveness is the bravest thing you can do after being hurt. Still, whispers lingered behind his back. He got special treatment for causing trouble. Once, I saw someone draw a red rat on Ethan's locker, but he just smiled. I've been branded for real before. This is just a marker. I asked if he'd ever consider telling his story in front of the whole school. He paused, then said, maybe someday, and I knew he was preparing for it, little by little. We entered senior year, buried in college applications and personal essays. Ethan's topic, what makes me feel like I belong? I hadn't read it, but judging by the look in his eyes while he typed, I knew it was the best thing he'd ever written. The student council held a vote for the valedictorian speech. No one was surprised when both Ethan and I made the list, but what caught me off guard was when Ethan nominated me. That night, I asked why he didn't want to speak. He smiled and said, you don't always need to say something. Sometimes surviving and moving forward is the answer. I nodded, and deep inside, I felt an old wound begin to close. 2 months before graduation, Preston returned to school for a memorial event. He came with his parents, shook hands with the principal, like nothing had ever happened. Ethan stood still, holding his camera, eyes unblinking. After the event, rumors spread again, this time accusing Ethan of blowing things out of proportion and nearly costing Preston's family a major investment in the school. The gossip caught like wildfire. I knew Ethan was being targeted again. One day, his college application was marked as incomplete for unclear reasons. Even though he had submitted everything, his name was removed from the priority list. He looked at me and said, this time, I won't stay silent. Ethan requested an official meeting with the admissions committee. He brought copies of every document, complete with stamped submission dates. And for the first time, I saw the principal being asked to sign a formal meeting record. Soon after, Ethan asked to speak at the Future Leaders Seminar. No one thought he'd bring up the past, but his very first sentence was, I used to be trapped in a box called silence. The speech lasted 7 minutes. He didn't name names or accuse anyone, he just told the truth. But each detail made the entire hall go quiet, and when he finished and bowed, the whole audience stood and applauded. That night, Ethan's social media was attacked. Anonymous messages accused him of milking the victim role and begging for sympathy. But this time, he didn't delete them. He screenshot every message and sent them to the school's media advisor. The investigation traced the message's IP address to a device registered in the library, where Preston had once worked overtime. When questioned, Preston neither confirmed nor denied it. But this time, no one stepped in to protect him. A new disciplinary hearing was opened, this time led by an external oversight board. Ethan didn't attend. He stayed in the editing room, working on the year-end documentary. I don't need to win anymore, he said. I just need to not back down. He was chosen as one of 3 students to speak at graduation. He wasn't the official valedictorian, but everyone knew who people really came to hear. I saw Preston sitting in the back row, head down the entire ceremony. In his speech, Ethan recalled the moment someone tried to brand him with a searing metal badge, not for revenge, but as a reminder that sometimes, the ones who stay silent are the ones hurting the most. And for the first time, many parents wiped away tears. At the end, Ethan opened a small wooden box. Inside was that same metal badge, now cold and polished. He placed it on the podium. I'm not afraid of it anymore. It belongs to the past, but I no longer live there. As the crowd filed out, I saw Preston standing by the corner of the schoolyard. He didn't say a word. He just handed Ethan a folded piece of paper, a handwritten apology. Ethan didn't read it right away. He just nodded. Thanks, even if it's too late. That night, Ethan and I lay on the dorm rooftop, watching the stars. I don't need to be remembered, he said. I just don't want to be misunderstood anymore. And I thought, that might be the greatest victory of all. A week after graduation, Ethan received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a black and white photo of the ceremony, but taken from a strange angle, like from inside the restricted admin offices. Scrawled on the back were the words, "Your story isn't over. We checked the hallway security cameras, but the footage from that night had been replaced. No one knew who accessed the control room the night before graduation." Ethan whispered, "Someone's been watching us. since the beginning. We started retracing every detail, scanning complaint forms, PTA meeting notes, supervisor duty logs. One name appeared far too often: Vice Principal Clark, a figure who had barely shown up in the story until now. He was also the one in charge of the school's student record system. Ethan remembered. It was Clark who once told him to handle everything internally and refused to sign his very first complaint form. Maybe the person behind the cover-ups had never stepped into the spotlight, and maybe the story we thought was over was just surface level. Ethan looked at me. His eyes were calm, but there was fire behind them. If the truth is still buried, then I'll keep digging until we reach the bottom. And I knew the real fight had only just begun. We agreed not to act alone this time, and reached out to Marcus, a former student who was expelled for grade tampering. Marcus sent us scanned copies of documents that had once been shredded, including one bearing the signature of Vice Principal Clark. Marcus told us, "I once heard Clark had ties to a powerful parent board. They control most of the school's funding." Turns out, Ethan was just one of many students deliberately pushed out of the system. But this time, we had proof. An old math teacher, Ms. Miriam, secretly sent us the minutes from a hidden meeting last year. In it, there was a section where Clark persuaded board members to reject students who were unsuitable by background. Ethan whispered, "This is it. What we needed." We decided to produce an anonymous expose video, compiling every piece of evidence and testimony. Marcus, Miriam, and 2 other former students agreed to participate, as long as their identities were protected. Ethan said, "We don't need names, just the truth." Over the next 3 weeks, we wrote the script, edited footage, recorded voiceovers, and consulted legal advisors. Everyone knew that once this video went public, there would be no turning back. But the closer we got to release, the more messages came in. "This happened to me too. I'm ready to share." The video was uploaded on a public platform under the title, "The School Behind the Golden Gate." Within 24 hours, it racked up over 100 views and hundreds of comments with personal stories. Clark's name began appearing in local media. The school board released a statement claiming the video was baseless and defamatory. Ethan received an email warning him of potential legal action. But we were ready. Every backup had already been sent to an independent media lawyer. Miriam was suspended for leaking internal information. On the day she left, nearly 30 students stood by the front gate, clapping and shouting, "Thank you, Ms. Miriam." Ethan wrote on the student bulletin board, "Silence is complicity." A major newspaper contacted Ethan for an interview and requested access to the original files. When the article was published, it revealed not only Clark's involvement but also exposed major donors behind him. The principal declined to comment. One night, Ethan received a message, "If you know what's good for you, stop now." He simply replied with a link to the video. It was a previously unreleased segment, an audio clip of Clark saying, "We have to cut them out if we want to keep the funding." We submitted every document to an educational human rights organization. An internal hearing was opened, now with external supervision. And during the meeting, Clark didn't show up. The following week, the school announced it would restructure its leadership and issued a public apology to the affected former students. Miriam was reinstated and personally thanked by the new principal. As for Ethan, he stayed silent, but his smile said everything. An independent oversight committee officially launched an investigation into Clark and the former donor board. Previously sealed records were finally made public. Ethan whispered, "The needle always finds its way out of the haystack." During the hearing, Clark was questioned about 11 wrongful suspensions over the past 5 years. A staff member stood up and revealed a forged document Clark had ordered them to sign. The room went silent, then buzzed with shocked murmurs. Clark claimed he was merely following donor directives and denied any personal wrongdoing, but leaked emails were presented, explicitly showing him ordering staff to remove unsuitable names from the scholarship list. The air in the room grew so heavy, it was hard to breathe. A parent took the stand and tearfully recounted how their daughter fell into severe depression after being unfairly expelled. Then came 2 alumni once branded ethically unfit. Each testimony drove another nail into the coffin of Clark's reputation. The board announced Clark's immediate suspension and referred the case to civil authorities. There was applause, not out of satisfaction, but from relief. One door had finally closed, so another could open. After the scandal, A key donor board member resigned and confessed publicly. Questionable scholarship funds were placed under investigation. The cleanup effort began to ripple across the larger educational system. Ethan quietly followed it all through live streams. He didn't say much, just wrote one line in his journal. Justice isn't a win, it's the beginning of peace. I froze a little when I read that. The school hosted a late graduation ceremony for the seniors, this time with a new valedictorian. Ethan was invited to speak, and this time, he said yes. He spoke of the things no one wanted to hear: invisible discrimination, corrupted systems, and the power of decency. And ended with, "We don't need better schools. We need a society that doesn't rely on better schools to decide who deserves a future." The room fell completely silent. After the event, anonymous letters poured in from students who had experienced school bullying. The school established a new student-faculty council to ensure equitable representation. For the first time, the school began to listen. Clark vanished from social media. No one talked about him anymore. Ethan told me, "I'm not angry anymore. Anger keeps them in your heart. Forgiveness is the real freedom." We left the school, each of us going our own way, carrying our own versions of the story. Ethan chose education as his major, and I knew, in the near future, he would be the one rebuilding the kind of school that almost destroyed him. That summer, we met again at a small cafe by the harbor. No one brought up the school, or Clark, but Ethan's eyes, as he looked out at the sea, calm and steady. For the first time, he looked his actual age. "Do you regret any of it?" I asked as the sun began to set. Ethan shook his head. "The worst things that ever happened to me also taught me who I really am." And I realized, some scars aren't meant to be erased. They remind us why we're still standing. When I returned to school after the break, everything looked the same. Long hallways, chalkboards, perfectly ironed uniforms. But I wasn't the same student anymore. I was someone who carried the story and knew how to tell it, so others wouldn't have to live it again. The next year, a new student transferred in, curly hair, soft voice, eyes that looked just as lost as mine once did. This time, I was the one who sat down next to him in the cafeteria, and he smiled. We decided to write down the entire story, unfiltered, unsoftened. The manuscript was sent to a major educational journal, and a few months later, Ethan called me just to say, they want to print it, without changing a single word. The article became a teaching resource at an educational workshop on discrimination and power structures in schools. One teacher cried while reading the part where Ethan spoke about forgiveness, and a student stood up and asked, "So what can we do?" I answered, "Tell your story, honestly, completely, and without fear." The boy nodded, and I remembered the first time someone ever invited me to sit with them at a lunch table. This story has no heroes, no perfect victory, and no real ending. It's just people, one by one, getting back up after being pushed down. And in doing that, the world changes, little by little, every day. I used to think school was supposed to teach me how to succeed, but in the end, it was surviving school that taught me how not to bow my head. And maybe the only lesson that ever really mattered was the one they never meant to teach.